Okay, students, for those of you who took the first semester or for those of you who didn't, but have a little familiarity with Scripture, Wisdom chapter 10 should resonate with you. The author goes through a list of the heroes that you should recognize because almost all of these are from the book of Genesis. The first formed father of the world is Adam. And after Adam's fall, she delivered him from his transgression and gave him strength to rule all things. Wisdom is personified as a woman here, as wisdom was in the book of Proverbs. And then here's Cain and Abel. But when an unrighteous man departed from her in his anger, he perished, because in rage he killed his brother. When the earth was flooded because of him, in other words, because of the sin of Cain and others like him, wisdom again saved it, steering the righteous man by a paltry piece of wood. That's Noah and the ark. So here we go. And if you don't know who she's talking about, she gives you hints. Wisdom does. Wisdom also, when the nations in wicked agreement had been put to confusion, recognized the righteous man and preserved him blameless before God and kept him strong in the face of his compassion for his child. That's Abraham, who is called upon to sacrifice Isaac. Wisdom keeps him strong, even in the face of his pity for Isaac, whom God asks him to sacrifice, and he is willing to until God substitutes the ram. Wisdom rescued a righteous man when the ungodly were perishing. He escaped the fire that descended on the 5 cities. Now what's he talking about? Well, this is Sodom and Gomorrah and how Lot and his family escaped through wisdom, which is to say, through heeding God's warning and command. Evidence of their wickedness, Sodom and Gomorrah, still remains, a continually smoking wasteland, plants bearing fruit that does not ripen, and a pillar of salt standing as a monument to an unbelieving soul. Remember, Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt as they fled the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So, and this is interesting, for because they passed wisdom by, the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah, they not only were hindered from recognizing the good, this is what St. Paul says in Romans, and this is also part of the mystery of the hardening of a person's heart. If you stubbornly set yourself against the good, you will eventually be prevented from recognizing it. As your heart hardens and as you have eyes but do not see and ears but do not hear. But also left for humankind a reminder of their folly so that their failures could never go unnoticed. Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a witness to what happens for people who give themselves over to abominable sin. Wisdom rescued from troubles those who served her. Now, who is this? When a righteous man fled from his brother's wrath, she guided him on straight paths. Who had enmity with his brother and had to flee because he had stolen his brother's birthright, tricked him and tricked his father, and so forth? Well, that's, of course, Jacob and Esau. And later, when he is living in the faraway place with Laban, when his oppressors were covetous, she stood by him and made him rich, and so forth. And then, of course, who's this? I should make this a quiz. Just identify who each of these people are. If I make this a quiz, we'll get to see who watches the video. By the way, for those of you watching on YouTube, my students are supposed to read the readings every day and then watch my videos and give me some sort of a comment or a question based on both. I suspect some of the students don't watch the videos or maybe don't read the readings. So what I should do is I should just put up a quiz. Just to see who is actually watching, because I'm giving you all the answers. When a righteous man was sold, wisdom did not desert him, but delivered him from sin. She descended with him into the dungeon, and when he was in prison, she did not leave him until she brought him the scepter of a kingdom and authority over his masters. Those who accused him, she showed to be false. She gave him everlasting honor. Who could that be? Who was sold into a slavery and then imprisoned in a dungeon, but then made the de facto wise ruler or administrator of the people in a fallen country? Who could that be? Well, maybe I won't tell you because I'll put it on the quiz. It's pretty obvious. And then, of course, she talks about Moses and the deliverance of Israel, which we are about to get to. But quickly, let's take a look at Galatians, okay? Many Catholics fell into an unnatural and unreasonable worship, well, not quite worship, but high regard for the Pope, because we had some really good popes right in a row who did some amazing things. But when Peter came to Antioch, Paul says, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers, the Gentile Christians, the Christians who had never been Jews, who were not circumcised. Circumcision, remember, is baptism in effect for Jewish people. It is their main rite of initiation into their faith. We learned about that with Abraham. But afterward, when some friends of James came, Peter wouldn't eat with the Gentiles anymore. He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted on the necessity of circumcision. This is a loose translation, but it gets to the point. As a result, other Jewish believers followed Peter's hypocrisy. And the Greek word there is the same word for hypocrite, hypocrisy. And even Barnabas, Paul's companion, was led astray by their hypocrisy. When I saw that they were not following the truth of the gospel message, I said to Peter in front of all the others, since you, a Jew by birth, have discarded the Jewish laws and are living like a Gentile, why are you now trying to make these Gentiles follow the Jewish traditions? In the early church, that was one of the big arguments. Did people who were converted to the Christian faith, Gentiles, did they have to first become Jews through circumcision, which of course in and of itself would have dissuaded many adult males? But beyond that is the idea, how are we saved? Are we saved through being Jews and following the Jewish law and then accepting Christ as sort of an addition to that? Or does Christ fulfill the law? Is access to salvation through Christ directly, who has perfected and completed the Jewish experience? Well, Paul insists, and he'll go into the theology of this in the next few verses, he insists that salvation is through Christ and that Gentile believers are not obligated to become Jews. And he reminds Peter that Peter knows this. In the book of Acts, through revelation, it is made clear to Peter, our first pope, that the Jewish thing has been perfected and that the new people of Israel are Christians. That's made clear. But Peter withdraws from proclaiming that by his actions in fearing these Christians who come, who are members of a faction who insist upon circumcision and insist upon Judaism as a gateway to Christianity. Peter apparently was trying to be political. He was trying to make people happy. You see? But am I a servant of men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. Am I a mere man pleaser? Well, Paul is accusing Peter of being only that and saying, you are confusing people. You are confusing the theology of Christ by doing what you're doing and by being afraid and kowtowing to the party of the circumcisers, the party of the Judaizers. To his face in front of the others, Paul gives a fraternal correction to Peter, and then Peter acknowledges this. We hear more about this whole issue in some of the other epistles and in the book of Acts. But my point is not so much the theology. My point is, how do we know, even if someone we respect, how do we know even if Mr. O'Brien is leading us astray? Part of what you do is you use your common sense. And you say, well, I really admire Peter. I really admire Mr. O'Brien. I really admire my pastor at my church. But he seems to be saying something that is at variance with what I've heard before and what I have a sense is true. in my heart and in my mind. That's part of what Paul is doing. There is a higher authority, wisdom perhaps, to tie this back in to the wisdom of Solomon, chapter 10, and the whole book of wisdom. The higher authority is what comes from God. Men and women will fall shy of that, even those that we most admire. So keep this in mind. This stuff is in the Bible for a reason, kiddos. Okay, more next time.